Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
And today what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this whole thing up, and I'm going to talk about the fifth thing. It's going to require you to get out of your comfort zone. Jesus is talking to this large crowd, and it's getting late. The sun's kind of going down. And the disciples are like, hey, Jesus, you should send the crowds away to buy themselves some food. But then Jesus, he kind of pokes at them, and he says, you can give them something to eat. And so the disciples are like, okay, here's what we got. They have 5 loaves and 2 fish. What Jesus says next is what takes your faith to that next level. Just bring them in here to me. God, 99.8% of the time says, I hear it, I know your heart, and I'm going to ask you to be part of it. And if you do what you do, then I will do what only I can do. And everyone ate until they were satisfied, for the food was multiplied in front of their eyes. And when it comes to personal ministry, bottom line for today is personal ministry positions us to experience God's faithfulness in response to our acts of faith.
All right, Buck, so the Longhorns. Did you watch the game on Saturday?
No, I didn't. I wanted to, but here's the deal. Like Jill and I, there was this couple we tried to have dinner with a bunch, and it's just one thing led to another, and then they got COVID, or it was all this kind of stuff.
And they're Aggies, so they weren't watching the game?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought that's what that
No,
was.
Jill this last week said, hey babe, when can we schedule? She's like, this day. And I was like, oh yeah, Saturday works perfect. Let's, so we went to the Grove Saturday night, and Saturday I'm like, we scheduled dinner as the game is happening.
Oh, man.
So I had my phone a little bit distracted. And then once it started going south, I was like, hey, so how are you?
Now that I'm hopeless, I can care.
Oh, man. And it was like, my heart sunk. And it felt like, it's like, wah, wah, wah.
Yep. Well, we'll probably keep talking about it from stage, because that's what we do here at Northpoint in the fall.
I know. Well, we're passionate about the Longhorns.
We are.
I just want my passions to match with some victory.
Yeah.
It's like week 1, it felt real good.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, man. But I haven't given up. I've got hope.
Yeah.
I still believe,
Casey Thompson's going to bring it in.
Yeah, it was interesting to see. Like, I just watched the highlights because we had dinner till, like, we hung out with this couple for like 3 or almost 4 hours.
Wow.
And it was great because it's the first time we got to meet him and all that stuff. But maybe Casey Thompson's the answer. I was really hoping. I've watched Card when he was in high school. So my oldest son, Sam, and him were playing 7-on-7. And so Jill and I were in the stands and we were watching him, and somebody said, oh, that's the future UT, Longhorn guy. And he was phenomenal.
Wow.
He was just head and shoulders above anyone else on the field, except my son Sam, of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
and anyway, so I'm cheering him on big time, but I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's uphill from there.
Yeah.
We are wrapping up a series, we did wrap up a series.
Yeah,
this
we
week.
did it.
My Sundays are getting mixed up.
There you go.
We wrapped up a series, Level Up, and you talked about personal ministry. And before we jump into the questions, you and I shared a little bit of a experience together in personal ministry. So we have our Mosaic ministry that goes to Kenya every year, and we've maybe missed a few years with COVID and some other cultural things, political things going on over there. But we try to go every year, and you and I went together, I don't know, it might have been 2012, 2013.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, one of those years. And our whole group, we probably had 20 people. We're flying into Zurich, I think, and we got split up into 3 groups, and you and I were in the same group. and everybody else went to like 5-star hotels in Turkey.
Yeah.
And we had a different experience.
Well, that's why I'm kind of closing my eyes, because I think it was Switzerland, wasn't it?
Oh yep.
Turkey would be interesting, but
Well, no,
there's some
Zurich. It was Zurich, Switzerland, but some of them went to Turkey from there.
Some went to Turkey, and then we ended up in East Africa. So, and there was great jealousy, like legit. I was like, "Are you kidding me? They're staying in this amazing hotel, and they're buying swatches, and they're eating like the best chocolates you can imagine.
Yep.
And we're in East Africa,
and we're in an airport that feels like it's held up by cardboard.
Yeah. It was half built.
It was half built. There are men with machine guns.
Yes, all around
us, and they're telling us our passports are fake.
Yeah, because I think me and Cheryl were the adults.
Yes.
And
I was 17.
Yeah, you were 17, but then we had several other, I think 2 other teenage girls, and their parents have entrusted, our church and this whole ministry, and here we are in East Africa, a country I can't even name, but I think you can.
Yep.
And
it's a Burkina Faso was the country, because I looked it up. I was like, where the heck did we go?
Yes.
And the town was called Ouagadougou.
Of course.
It might not be called that now, but it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. And they, like, our passports weren't really stamped correctly or something because of the mix up with the airline. So we're standing at like customs, and they're trying to take our passports and check our luggage and security. And one of the teenage girls, they began to like pull her back. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And I was like, and so it was like this contentious, there's machine guns. I'm saying, no, I don't know how to speak whatever language is being spoken.
Yeah.
And it was a moment to where I really was like, God, I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I really didn't know what's going to happen next. Now, this is not helpful for anyone wanting to go on a future mosaic trip.
Ideally speaking, our group does not get split up into those.
This is the only time it's happened to this degree. But I remember I was pretty nervous.
Yeah.
And then we ran out in the rain to the steps to the plane that was like a couple hundred yards.
Well, yeah, it was like from a movie. It was the one plane at the airport.
Yeah.
And it was like a nice, I don't know, what is it, Kenyan Air maybe?
Yeah.
And it was like a 737. It was a big plane.
Yeah.
And there were like 7 of us on the flight.
Yeah.
Something really small.
Yeah, we had to run out, get soaked. I'm sure our luggage got soaked. I think that was a year they lost my luggage, and so I had no hairspray, which was a major ordeal.
And then I discovered that you actually don't need it because your hair just does that naturally.
Yeah, there's some naturalness in this little curl in there.
Yep.
Yeah,
well, that was an example for us of personal ministry. And I think that was a great trip. God did a lot of cool things. We
100%.
discovered a lot of cool things. I think for me, the happiest I'd ever been is like taking off from Burkina Faso and being like, okay, we made it out of that country.
Yeah.
But, you talked about personal ministry this past Sunday and the importance of that and how God grows our faith. And you use this term, Jesus nudge. And I want to, as we dive into our discussion today, I want to talk a little bit about that term, what it is and what it isn't. You can say there's a differentiation between a Jesus nudge, a nudge from culture, a nudge from, a friend who gives you certain advice, a nudge from what you just ate for breakfast, or a nudge from like... That experience, the music was loud. That burrito, exactly. So, what are some distinctives? Because I think we can kind of chalk up a Jesus nudge to a lot of things, and we could like inadvertently justify behavior by saying this is a Jesus nudge, therefore I'm going to do this. So, what are some distinctives of a Jesus nudge?
Yeah. So on Sunday, it's this is sometimes behind the scenes what happens on Sunday. So first service, I really didn't make the comment I made second service because I got some feedback from first service. So second service, I didn't do a good job on this, because I'm trying to think how to say this, and basically I just said, how do we not get weird? And so I said, I want to be careful with that because sometimes like God calls us to do things that you would perceive as weird. It's like, Buck, that's a pretty high risk. Or Buck, that's something that wouldn't be normal. Now, it's totally scriptural. It's totally what Jesus would call us to do. But it may seem a little bit weird, for somebody to do that. So I wanted to be careful with that comment, but I think that's the spirit of what you're saying is like, how do we not get weird and start doing things that are actually not counterproductive, not ministering for the benefit of people, but maybe it's very selfish, self-focused, or maybe it's relationally hurtful, or maybe it's culturally hurtful, to do certain things. So anyways, I think a few things, and this is not a complete comprehensive, but I think Scripture is really clear. Paul says in 1 Corinthians to take every thought captive. So if you feel like Jesus is nudging you, well, fantastic. but I think there is a process to start going like, hey, is this from God? Is this from the burrito? Is this from God? Is this from culture? And this is one of the beauties of the scripture, of the Bible. Paul says to Timothy, all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. So it's like almost like you need to take scripture and shine it on the Jesus nudge and to illuminate what that is. So I'm being nudged. Can I find it in the scriptures? And this is where second service, I did a much better job and said, this is where private disciplines like time with God, opening the Bible is so important. Because if you're being nudged to do something relationally, to say something, to confront somebody, but it's really hard to find that in the scriptures. In fact, it's the opposite of what the scriptures would teach. Well, that's how you begin to discern and be wise with the Jesus nudge. I think there's a whole lot of scriptures in this. I think it's 1 John. The whole letter of 1 John is about there was so much corruption in teaching in the first century, and people were taking like the grace of Jesus and going, I shall do whatever I want. I can yes, I'm a follower of Jesus and I love Jesus, but now I'm going to sin it up. I'm going to do everything I want
because grace abounds. That whole thing. And
so John says, man, test the spirits. If somebody's teaching you that, you should test the spirits. Now, test the spirit according to Jesus. So that's the standard. So it's to go back to the person of Jesus. What did Jesus do? This is why, again, spending time reading the scriptures is so important, because the more you can follow Jesus and see how he handled that conversation, see what he called you to do as his follower, it gives you clarity to go, maybe that Jesus nudge isn't the wisest. Maybe confronting that whole situation or exposing that whole situation is really going to create more division than unity. And because I'm hurt, I want to go, and I feel like this Jesus nudge is saying, go confront them. But the ultimate motivation of me wanting to confront them is actually to hurt them.
Yeah.
And I have to take that
God told me
captive.
to tell you.
Right.
Fill in the blank.
Exactly. So it's one of those things is to go like, okay, well, the scripture from that. And then I think, Proverbs 27 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Do you have somebody in your life who you can sit down with, who you have enough trust with, who you can say, hey, I got this nudge. What do you think? I want to invite you into that. I trust you. And that person is going to give you feedback, again, according to who the person of Jesus Christ is. And that's really important. I think, there's a scripture, I think in 1 Timothy, where Paul is talking to Timothy, and he says, when you have maybe a desire, or you have something that you are personally convicted that doesn't align with sound doctrine, our temptation is to surround ourselves with people, and I love how the scripture says this, that will tickle our ears, who will tell us exactly what we want to, so that we can go do the very thing Jesus called us not to.
Yeah.
That's a big, big, big deal. So again, there's a lot of discernment, I think, through relationships, I think through scriptures, I think through inviting God into that. Hey, let me pause a day or two. Sometimes, hey, if you need to say that or do that, a day or two is not really going to matter. So take a day or two and invite God into that. I think sitting down with a small group leader, a counselor, a pastor, all those things are wonderful to test the spirits, to take your thoughts captive, submit them to Christ, and say, okay, Jesus, what would you say about this Jesus nudge?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've experienced that in my life too, on multiple different, probably two different avenues where I've gone I think I have this Jesus nudge. I've come to you or a friend or someone going, I feel like God is pushing me in this direction, and you're able to go, okay, well, here's what the scriptures say, and here's what maybe you should think about with this, and you're able to be that wounds from a friend kind of thing. And then also where I feel like I'm getting a little bit off track, and I come to you and I'm like, I feel this way, or I go to my counselor, I feel this way, and it's kind of this nudge back on to it's almost these guardrails, these boundaries that kind of keep you in lane with truly pursuing what God has for us as individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like on Sunday, one of the things I said is hey, maybe you need to apologize first. Well, I can't tell you how many times, with Jill or with my boys, I feel like they wronged me. They were the majority. They were in the majority of wrongness, according to me. Right? That's how that works. And so I didn't feel like, man, I had a big part of the piece of the pie. So I wanted to confront them, or I wanted to say, here's what I'm going to do, or and sitting down and talking with my counselor about that and just saying, hey, here's the deal. My counselor has said, hey, Buck, what do you think about maybe you owning your piece of the pie first? Do you think that potentially could prime the pump? Do you think that could potentially lead to reconciliation? Do you think that could lead to healing? And even though it seems really unfair, what do you think about that? And that's helped guide and help me discern the Jesus nudge and go, you know what? I think that's what God would have me do. If I'm going to be a servant to all, as Christ called me to be, that's really hard, but that's what love requires of me. John 13, Jesus said, a new command I give you, love as I have loved you. That's the standard, and that should be the guardrails, if you will, for our Jesus nudge.
Yeah. So kind of two things there. You would say, the scriptures, does the Jesus nudge align with what the scriptures say? Mm-hmm. And then does the Jesus nudge align with what kind of trusted advisors who want what's best for you in your life would say as well?
Sure, yeah, wisdom.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, wisdom is supreme. So all you have to get it, the Proverbs say, and so, wisdom oftentimes can come from, the advice of others or, somebody who's going to give you wise counsel.
Yep. So if we're going to kind of pay attention or in our lives be in a posture to receive these nudges in our life, what are some of the practical things we can do to kind of ensure that the radar for these nudges is accurate and open, kind of just day to day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, I think, there's a sensitivity to a Jesus nudge, and there's a discernment to the nudges that are not Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think that grows as obedience grows. In other words, the more times that I discern and go, okay, man, I'm tempted to, financially do this, or I feel like Jesus is nudging me to financially do this, or morally, here's something I want to do, a desire that I feel unfulfilled. And I don't know, is this Jesus saying, I don't know, this kind of thing, or, whatever it is. And, relationally, financially, morally, with job situations, family situations, the whole thing. The more times I say, okay, Jesus, I'm going to trust you, and I'm obedient to that, and it may not be totally logical. It may not be beneficial for me, but beneficial for those on the other side of me. And it's really clear Jesus it's like he's not leaving me alone and saying, Buck, I need you to do this. The more times I say yes, my sensitivity grows. And I'm able to discern more and more, not only a Jesus nudge from a non-Jesus nudge, but I'm able to experience his faithfulness on the other side of that obedience. But the opposite is also true, that the more times that I say no to Jesus, it's like my sensitivity decreases to the nudge. Mm-hmm. And, the scriptures say real clearly that you can sear your conscience. In other words, your conscience, that small voice that is informing the Jesus nudge, that's where the very Spirit of God can live. Well, you can actually make that scar tissue harder and harder and harder to where it's almost impossible to hear him. It's like his voice is so dull. The Jesus nudge is like when I say that, you're like, oh, I've never felt it. That's just nothing. That's not part of me. Well, you have the ability to increase the volume or turn the volume almost completely off. Mm-hmm. And the catalyst to that is your obedience. And so Jesus says, hey, I want you to give. I don't want to give. Well, just listen to him. Mm-hmm. And when you step into that, all of a sudden you're like, man, I got to see his faithfulness. Here's how God used those finances. Here's what God did in me. Here's how God provided for me when I didn't think. Man, Jesus, I don't want to do this relationally. I don't want to make that call. Okay, well, I've asked you to make the call and trust me. Okay, I trust you. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, this is amazing. And then you're at the restaurant and it's like, and I want you to buy their meal. And these are some of the examples I shared, but these are things I've done in my life. And it's like, okay. And all of a sudden it's like, man, this couple, I met them and I heard their story and I heard where they're at financially. And they were praying right before they walked in the restaurant, God, we just want to see you provide. Are you real? And God allowed me to be part of their story. And you're like, oh my gosh. And now all of a sudden there's a heightened sensitivity. There's an alertness to what Jesus is doing. And now it's like, man, God is with me. And it's cool. Well, again, the opposite is true. And so I think just the other day, I was having a fine conversation with my oldest son, and when I say fine conversation, it was pretty contentious, and I lost it. Like, for me personally, I got to the point where I felt so, honestly, I mean, there were a lot of things that prefaced or that were before it, but I felt hurt, and I got to the point of feeling so hurt that I raised my volume pretty loud, and I could tell it scared him. It triggered some things inside of him, and it was like, and then he reflected. He said, "Dad, you talked about this the other day on stage, with another one of your sons, and that you're working on this." Well, obviously not very much. And so that's a mixture of all those things, because I was still very much hurt. I felt like what he was doing was wrong. But I couldn't get away from this voice inside of me that said, "Buck, just own your piece of the pie. Just own your piece of the pie." That was your brokenness. That had nothing. Yes, he did these things, but at the end of the day, your response is your response. Your reaction is your reaction. It was sinful, it was wrong, and it hurt your son. You need to apologize in the midst of a lot of hurt. And there's a sensitivity to that. And it's like, when I did that and just said, "Hey, can we pause a second? I just have to own my piece of the pie." You're 100% right. That's very hypocritical for me to do. It's the very thing that led to build the bridge so we could have a more constructive and helpful and reconciling and healing conversation. There's been that, financially. So many times the Jesus nudge is like, "I don't want to give," but it's like, for 4 Austin in our building, like, this is in the season that I need the most money because my kids are crazy expensive. Mm-hmm. And it's like, listening to that, it just increases the volume to go, "God, like, this number, are you kidding me? Like, I don't know where all that's going to come from." And watching God provide, and it just increases that sensitivity. But again, as I alluded to earlier, as Paul says in Timothy, he just says, there are times we don't want to give into the Jesus nudge, so we'll surround ourselves with a bunch of people to validate our lack of obedience and to do the opposite of what God calls us to do. And I'm just telling you, God begins to become more and more and more distant, and you sear your conscience. Mm-hmm. And so I just think obedience is, to me, the catalyst to the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it's it's interesting. It kept making, as you were talking, it kept making me think of the scripture that says the pure in heart will see God clearly. Mm-hmm. And it's, so often people go, "What's it like to listen to God? What's it like to hear from God?" And oftentimes we can see him most clearly when that pure in heart idea, when we are already being obedient to what he's called us to do. Mm-hmm. And, so often we're like, what about this? And I want to do this. And is God telling me this? And we're not owning a piece of the pie of the obedience pie, to God already on this side of the things, whether it relates to our marriage, our relationships, our finances, or whatever it might be, or even just spending time with God, waking up each day and inviting him into our lives. And it's like those things open up what you're saying, that obedience, so that we can actually see God clearly. And so when we do have that nudge, we're able to discern, God, I can see what you're trying to push me to do. And so, it makes a lot of sense.
And I'll just add one, and I did this on Sunday, but I just think it's worth reiterating. I think when it comes to moral categories, Jesus is very, very clear on the moral categories. And so pick whatever one, Jesus spoke into it. And when we decide to say, "Hey, no, I'm going to do what only I want to do," and Jesus, I really don't care what you said, or I really want to convolute or confuse what you said, again, I think that numbs our conscience. It sears our conscience, and we can find ourselves because of habitual sin. In other words, I'm gonna do whatever I want to do. It now feels like, oh my gosh, like, God, where are you? God, you feel so distant. Mm-hmm. God, I just, like, Jeremy, you say you hear from God. Man, I've never felt that. Well, again, I think it's look at your obedience. It's like, is there something God has asked you to do a long time ago? You just refuse to. And if that's the case, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, or even it just is there a sin that keeps popping up over and over and over again, and it's like this, like Paul talks about, this thorn in his side, and it's like, you got to figure that out. You got to get kind of obedient there before you start asking, how do I hear from God, and what do I do there? Because that's potentially clouding and fogging a lot of the judgment in terms of, like, what are those nudges you're getting from God?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so last question. of the series, and it's been a 5-part series. We've had a lot of questions, a lot of discussions, a lot of messages with the series. But more or less, me representing kind of the people who go to Northpoint, or the people who listen to this podcast or engage with content online, and sitting across from you, having been on the other side of you, for me, for 10 years, but you've been a Christian for 20 years, following Jesus for 20 years, something like that.
Yeah.
So decades. We'll say decades. That seems like a good way to do it. And you've gone to seminary. You've been pastoring people for, over a decade now. We're finishing up a series all about faith. What would be something that you would want to share or encourage with people as it relates to just your desire for people and their faith and growing to have this kind of God is with me kind of faith?
Yeah, I think, again, if I'm listening to you correctly, and you have to correct me if I'm not, because sometimes I'm like, I just projected everything in my head, and you're like, I didn't ask that.
Yeah.
But I do think, I think sometimes when you experience something that's so cool, when you experience something that's, we've talked about this before, but like having a son, having a daughter, having a child, you can't quantify it. You can only experience it. And when you experience how surreal and how amazing it is, you desire that for everybody on the other side of you. And it doesn't make you better or worse. It just makes you had an experience. And I think that's the same thing when it comes to faith. And this is part of the whole series. I just want people to know how real God is, how tangible God is, how your faith can really be trust and confidence in something objective, not some feeling. The feeling comes as a result of where your faith and confidence are. And so for me, I think the best thing I can describe over the years as what's happened inside of me, and this is not the perfect illustration, but I think, there are moments in my relationship with Jill. And I say moments because, I think we're human and lots of stuff gets in the way. But there are times when I sit with Jill and I just look at her and I'm so mesmerized. She is absolutely so stunning in those moments. She is so beautiful in those moments. She is, it's like we're in complete step. It's like I can see her, I can hear her. Everything in me feels compelled to want to love her. There's those moments that I sit there and I go, man, there's no other place on the planet, in the universe I'd rather be than with her. I feel so united, so one, so together with her. And it's like, man, if I could just put that in a bottle, if I could capture those moments, it is like I have air in my lungs and I can breathe and I can see, and I am so complete in those moments. And I think the same thing I experienced with Jesus Christ, and the same thing I experienced with faith, to where all of a sudden I can see me more clearly than I've ever been able to see. And not through my eyes and through my accomplishments and through what I have or don't have or what I've done or not done, but I see me so clearly through the eyes and the lens of Jesus Christ. And I feel so good about me. Again, not because of who I am, but because of who Christ says I am. And it's such a empowering feeling. It's such a peaceful feeling. It's such a content feeling that I'm, as a result of the object of my faith, because now I begin to see Jesus through his lens. I begin to see me, and it's so just surreal. And I think there's a way that in faith that I've experienced that, I think like Adam and Eve, it says in the beginning in Genesis that Adam walked with God in the cool of the garden. That my prayers today have been much more about not speaking but listening, much more about sensing that, God, you are with me. And it's like I walk with God in the coolness of the garden. And that is like a legit daily thing. Now, there are some days I feel like, ooh, distant, or there's some, but that is something that's so real and so tangible. And it provides like truly a peace that transcends all understanding, that when I get hard news or good news, like there really is this legitimate piece of me that's on the inside, that I'm human and I feel it and it hurts or whatever it is. But there's a deeper level of peace than I've ever experienced in my life. And the more that I hear from him, the more that I'm prompted by God, and the more I'm obedient to what he says, it's like I truly do know God is with me. I know he's with me. And when all of the culmination of all of that is present, I can see me clearly. I can see God clearly. I'm walking with him. He's giving me contentment and peace and wisdom and meaning and purpose in my life. of whatever it is in my marriage, with my sons, with Northpoint, with morality, there's no other place I'd rather be. It's the most meaningful, beautiful, purposeful experience I can ever imagine, well beyond what I described with Jill. And that's what I want for people. And that's what I want for me. And so that's really why we did this series. And my greatest hope is that if you're really willing to go back and listen to the series, and you gotta apply it and trust God with it, I do think it's possible for all of us. I really think that's possible for people to go, man, I wake up every day and I know He's with me. He's right here with me, and that gives me a peace, a meaning, a purpose, a significance that I just can't experience anywhere else. And that's what I want, and that's why we did the series.
Yeah. Well, Buck, on behalf of people listening and watching, thank you for, all the pieces of the series, and also even just thank you for that, for, just talking about your faith journey, because I think it is both the good and the bad pieces of your journey and your family and all the things. It's inspiring and helpful, and really does help people take steps in their own faith journey. So thank you for this, and we're going to wrap up, and I'll just say I'm excited about where we're going next.
Oh, yeah.
Because we are kicking off a series called Remodeling Your Mind, with the idea that, our life direction begins with the direction of our thoughts. And our thoughts are really powerful, and they're more spiritual and more intertwined with our spiritual life than we may think. And so we're going to be having a couple of discussions about that here over the coming weeks and month. And so if you are watching online, you're listening, make sure to be there Sunday, tune in online, and we are looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you guys so much for watching, listening.